Alright, today I'm going to do a little quick video on this rear end gear swap I'm doing on my 2013 Toyota Tacoma pickup. The problem with this truck is it's got the 5-speed manual with overdrive, but it's not geared low enough, and a lot of times if you go into a tight corner, you really have to downshift back into first. It's ridiculous. And generally you can't even put the thing into overdrive unless you're on the thruway doing over 70. It's ridiculous. So the final drive in this thing is a 330. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the center section out. I've got a set of 373 gears made for this truck, and I'm going to swap that in. So I'm going to do a little video of how that's done. So the first thing I'm going to do is pull the brake drum off here. Then I'm going to loosen up some of the brake lines. Okay, now this is not too hard. There's a little clamp for the ABS. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to undo the mounts for the brake line, just so I'll be able to get a little more clearance to pull the axle out. That'll give me a little more freedom to move the brakes. Now this type of rear end has a removable center section, so you don't have to pull the rear end out, but you do have to pull the axle shafts out. That lets you pull the center rear diff out of the housing, leave that all in. So what you do is there's 4 bolts that hold the axle retainer onto the rear end housing. So let me pop them off real quick. Right in the bucket. Once you have those 4 bolts loose, this whole thing just comes forward, and that allows you to pull the center section out. The axle should be clear of the center diff now. So next step in this process is going to be to pull the center section out. Okay, I don't know how good this is going to come out here under the truck, but at this point I've disconnected the drive shaft flange from the flange on the center diff unit there, and pretty much as usual I emptied big pile of gear oil over the driveway, because generally that's my trademark, and I don't know why I can't keep it in a container, but I can't. So anyhow, the flange came apart alright. I had to use the air impact on it because the bolts were a little stubborn. Now all that's left is to undo the series of bolts around the center pumpkin there and pull it out. So that's what I'm going to be doing next. Okay, I've got the center section out here on the bench, and wasn't bad. Working at home on jack stands and not a lift took me a little better than an hour to get this thing out in real time. Came apart easy. The hardest thing was holding the axles apart to pull the center section out without disconnecting the brake lines. There's enough slack in the brake lines where you can do that, because I really didn't want to open up the brake lines anyhow. So going to take this apart, and this is a new ring and pinion I'm going to stick in this thing, and hopefully this all goes well. Okay, at this point I've pulled the ring gear off the carrier, and actually that's it down there. This is the new 373 that's going to go in this thing. The bolts that hold the ring gear on there are 17 millimeters. Plus they're on with some pretty serious thread locker. So when I went to try and take it off, I used one of my English sized impact sockets that fit pretty good, and I think if there wasn't the thread locker they would have done it, but I didn't like the way it was I didn't like the way it was working. It looked at it like it had the potential to slip, so that was a good excuse to run out to Sears. So I bought a set of metric impact sockets in long and short lengths, plus another set of metric half-drive short sockets in 6-point, because the set I had was 12-point, which I sort of find to be totally useless. They round bolts, and they're just I never have too much use for a 12-point socket. I guess it has its applications, but in any case, now the next step is to put the ring gear up onto the carrier, torque the bolts down, and then I'll proceed to pull the pinion gear out of the carrier and go from there. Okay, at this point I've got the ring gear installed onto the differential carrier. I've got all the bolts are nice and clean, so when I go to torque them, I'll be able to do so and hopefully get accurate torque. The ring gear, sometimes you have to heat these things to get them onto the carriers, but this one, it pulled on comfortably. I used a couple of alignment dials to make sure that the ring gear went on as intended and lined up with the holes good, and then I tapped it on with a soft mallet far enough to get the bolts to engage, and I carefully pulled it on with a 3/8 drive ratchet, and it went right on. So at this point I'm going to torque it 70 foot-pounds as a spec. I'll torque this on, and then I'll take a look at the harder part of this deal, which is the pinion bearing. Okay, the next step here is I've got the carrier and the ring gear all buttoned up, ready to go. Next thing will be to remove the pinion nut and pull the ring and pinion out, and then I think in this case I'm going to change the bearing, since it's pretty much a new bearing, and put that on the replacement pinion gear, and see how the whole rear end sets up using all the original shims. Maybe I'll get. Okay, I've got this thing here, and this is a puller to pull the big pinion bearing off the pinion. Now, I didn't come up with this idea. I shamelessly stole it off the internet, but looked like something worth having, especially if you're going to do this in your garage. And what it does is you have these two clamshells, you have this extractor here, and this fits down here like that. This washer here, which is specific for this Toyota application, takes all the play out of this when you put these clamshells on here. So it's a smooth fit, so it doesn't let the bearing take the brunt of the load. So what you do is you put that around the bearing, these two clamshells. Then there's this piece here, which is just a little deal to hold it together. And then what you do is you take your impact wrench and you drive down the spindle. Okay, I got the puller installed on the old pinion gear here, and this truck's got some pretty low miles on it, so I'm going to reuse these bearings, and I'm going to hope that the shims and everything that work with this ring gear will work with the other ring gear. May or may not happen, but if it does, that's going to be great. So I'm going to make a little bit of noise here and pull this pinion bearing off the impact. Whoops. Okay. Wrong way. Okay, the bearing is off with no damage at all to it. It's totally going to be good to be reused again. There's other ways to pull these off. There's different bearing splitters and stuff you can use, but a lot of times it'll tear the race up. When I used to work on the 10 and 12 bolt GM rear ends, you know, more than once trying to get one of these things off, I tore up the race on it. So this worked pretty good. I wish I could take credit for the design, but I can't. So whoever did it's a genius in my eyes. So that worked out pretty good. No damage. I'll be able to use this race again. Okay, a while ago I had a piece of test equipment at work that they were throwing out, and it had that frame on it, and that frame was screaming to me to be an Arbor Press. So I took the arc welder out when they had some fun and welded up these parts and pieces and came up with this press, which I use over and over again. And it's great for what I'm doing here, pressing bearings on axles or any other thing you might want to have. It cost me no dollars except for the hydraulic jack at the top. It's 8 ton and does everything I ever wanted to do. So I'm going to push the bearing on this thing now. I got this bottomed out, which it did. Good.